Hey, take your Bibles and open up with me to Numbers 13. If you're following along with us in our reading schedule, I always try to preach what you'll be reading into in the upcoming week. And I don't know if you've kind of made it through Leviticus and are almost through Leviticus, and you're coming into Numbers now. And as you continue to read there, I just want to encourage you, keep looking for ways that you can apply what you're finding there to your life and be encouraged by that. Let me kind of set the context for you. It's happened really fast. The Israelites came up out of Egypt. They crossed the Red Sea. The Egyptian army was destroyed. God has provided for them manna in the wilderness. And they have been there at Mount Sinai. They traveled north from Mount Sinai. And they're on the verge of entering into the Promised Land, right? And they come to this place called Kadesh Barnea, where God asked them to take a step of faith. Because bear in mind, they've been living down in Egypt for 400 years. So though this land was promised to them and to their forefathers, many of them have never seen it, probably, and have never experienced it. And so they send in 12 spies. Right? And here's the story. I'll pick up the reading for you in Numbers 13. But before I do, just let me give you a brief thought on the word faith. Elton Trueblood said, "Faith is not belief without proof, but trust without reservation." I like that. I like that because some might say, well, you believe in things that there's no proof for. That's not true. But I like it even just as much because it communicates to you that faith isn't simply about what you say you believe. It's about how you involve yourself in that belief. It's not simply what you believe. It's how you're living out what you believe. How much are you trusting God? Now, I put that on the table at the start, but I'm going to tell you, here's how we think about this, right? That faith sometimes still is a hard thing to do. So if you come in this morning and you say, Pastor Phil, you have no understanding. If you knew what just happened in my life this week alone, you would understand that it's hard for me to trust the Lord right now. And I'll acknowledge that. But that being said, we want to see how it is we go about placing our faith and trust in this God who is good. With that in mind, I'll pick up the reading at Numbers 13, verse 1. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the people of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a chief among them." So Moses sent them from the wilderness of Paran, according to the command of the Lord, all of them, men who were heads of the people of Israel. Jump down with me to verse 17 of the same chapter. Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan, and said to them, "Go up into the Negeb, and go into the hill country, and see what the land is, and whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, whether they are few or many, and whether the land that they dwell in is good or bad, and whether the cities that they dwell in are camps or strongholds, and whether the land is rich or poor, and whether there are trees in it or not. Be of good courage, and bring some of the fruit of the land." Now the time was the season of the first ripe grapes. Now jump down with me to verse 25. At the end of 40 days, they returned from spying out the land. And they came to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the people of Israel in the wilderness of Paran to Kadesh. And they brought back to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told him, "We came to the land to which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. However, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there, and the Amalekites dwell in the land of the Negeb, and the Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the hill country, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan." But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "Let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it." And then the men who had gone up with him said, "We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are." So they brought to the people of Israel a bad report of the land that they had spied out, saying, "The land through which we have gone to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people that we saw in it are of great height. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who came from the Nephilim, and we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them." Chapter 14, verse 1. Then all the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people wept that night. And all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. And the whole congregation said to them, "Would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in the wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become a prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt?" And they said to one another, "Let us choose a leader and go back to Egypt." Wow. So that's an amazing story, isn't it? It's a great reminder that whatever God asks us to do in our life is going to require some level, some opportunity of faith. In fact, I was thinking about that. Why is faith hard? Why do we find faith hard? And so I've come up with 3 reasons for you this morning that I granted doubt and a lack of faith or unbelief generates these things. So it's a little bit like what came first, the chicken or the egg. But I do know this, that when I tracked back and looked at the Israelites in Numbers 11 and Numbers 12, it made sense to me why they didn't have faith in Numbers 13. So go back with me to Numbers 11. Let's take that first one. Faith is hard when you practice a complaining spirit. Okay? If you have practiced a spirit that has had an element of complaint all the time, if you find that you're complaining, then it's no wonder that faith is hard. In fact, somewhere between 10 to 14 times, depending on how you count them, the Israelites complain in the wilderness. Okay? Now, I don't know about you, if you're a mom or a dad and you have kids and you start to travel someplace and you got a little bit of time to travel there, okay, and they start to complain in the back of the car, how many of you say right there, "Praise Jesus, this is such a wonderful trip," okay? That's exactly right, okay? It sounds like a little dog barking in your ear all the way there, right? It just sounds like, "Hey, when are we going to get there? When are we going to get there? I am so tired of riding in this car," right? So just imagine momentarily days and days and days and days of that, okay? All they did was complain. To God, they just kept complaining and griping. Over and over again, they say things like, "We should have just died in Egypt. What are we doing up here? We're going to die in the wilderness. Or let's return to Egypt where we won't die." They totally forgot that they were slaves when they were there. Faith is hard when you practice a complaining spirit. Look with me at verse 1. "And the people complained in the hearing of the Lord about their misfortunes. And when the Lord heard it, his anger was kindled, and the fire of the Lord burned among them and consumed some of the outlying parts of the camp. And then the people cried out to Moses, and Moses prayed to the Lord, and the fire died down. So the name of that place was called Taberah, because the fire of the Lord burned among them. Now the rabble, or the outsiders that were among them, had a strong craving, and the people of Israel also wept again." See, they just were complaining, and God disciplined them, and now they're complaining again. "And the people of Israel wept again and said, 'Oh, that we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt that cost nothing, and the cucumbers and the melons and the leeks and the onions and the garlic. But now all our strength is dried up, and there is nothing at all but this manna to look at.'" Okay? Wow. Again, they complain about their situation. They complain about what's for dinner. They are complainers. Right? Let's think about this for a second. If you have spent your life in that negativity and complaining, if you see things and every time you see something you just complain about it, what makes you think that you're going to be ready to exercise any kind of faith when the Lord says, "I want you to take this step by faith. I want you to act on your feeling. I want you to move forward by faith"? What makes you or me think that we would be ready for that? Wherever there is a complaining spirit, it's always going to be hard to practice and live out faith with the opportunities that God has given us. Some 10 to 14 times they complain. Here's the second idea in the message. Faith is hard when you tend towards a controlling attitude. Okay? It's really hard if you only feel comfortable when everything's controlled and you got everything under control. It's going to be really hard for you to exercise faith. Now watch that in Numbers 12 with Miriam and Aaron. In Numbers 12, verse 1, we read, "Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married." That would have been an Ethiopian woman, for he had married a Cushite or an Ethiopian woman. That's because probably most commentators believe his first wife had died, and so now he remarries, and they don't care for the person he's married. And so they said, verse 2, "Has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also?" And the Lord heard it. And here's what I want you to hear. "Now the man Moses was very meek, more than all the people in the earth." Okay? So there's some things we learn here immediately as well. Faith is hard when you practice a complaining spirit, but faith is hard if you tend towards a controlling attitude. And just note this, Um, they said, Miriam said that she should have control. Now, just like God judged the Israelites, he judges Miriam. Miriam and Aaron, he says, get down here. Moses, come down here. And they step in the presence of the Lord, and the Lord strikes Miriam with leprosy. And she steps out, and Aaron starts to call out to Moses for her. Moses, Moses, can you fix this? Can you fix this? And God says, listen, she'll spend 7 days with this leprosy outside of the camp because she stood up against you, and I love this, who is meek and humble. I like that. You know why? Because here's some help for the complaining and controlling in our midst. And if you have a tendency here, if you have a tendency to complain a lot or have to have everything in control, then this is great hope for you. Here's the first one. Recognize that strong desires bring short-term memory loss. Okay? Strong desires bring short-term memory loss. I thought it was, at first when I wrote that, I thought, it should be long-term memory loss. But no, it's short-term because they hadn't even been in the wilderness that long and they forgot something. Look with me at how the New Living Translation translates Numbers 11. Then the foreign rabble who were traveling with the Israelites began to crave the good things of Egypt. And the people of Israel also began to complain. Oh, for some meat, they exclaimed. We remember the fish we used to eat for free in Egypt. Okay. Now, does anybody find that funny at all? Okay. Like 400 years you were slaves, right? And you thought you were free? Okay. It only took a few months for them to forget what God had done on their behalf. He had broken them out of slavery. He had freed them, and they remembered it differently now, just because they were hungry. Just think about that for a second. That's how many of us are. We have a desire, and we tend to forget what God has done for us. Let me give you the next idea. Here it is. Realize that God hears and God sees. Okay. Notice two things that happen in Numbers 11 and Numbers 12. Numbers 11, 1. And the people complained in the hearing of the Lord about their misfortunes when the Lord heard it. Look at Numbers 12, verse 2. And they said, Miriam and Aaron, has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also? And the Lord heard it. You might think that in your complaining or in your controlling that nobody knows but you. That's not true. God hears it. That should just kind of strike the fear of the Lord in us for a second. When you complain about what you have for dinner, God hears it, just like he heard the Israelites. Okay? When you complain about the circumstances that surround your life, God hears it. God hears it. Not only God hears it, but God sees it. Hebrews 4:13 says, there is no creature hidden from his sight, but all are naked and exposed before the eyes of him to whom they must give an account. Finally, note this. Remember that humility matters. Remember that humility matters. There you go. Remember that humility matters more than ability. Miriam says, can't we do this? Right. And the very next verse says this, but the man Moses was very humble, very meek, beyond all the others on the earth. Humility matters more than ability. And here's why. Both the controlling and the complaining lack humility. Complaining lack humility because we think we deserve more, and the controlling lack humility because we think we can actually get what we think we deserve. Right? Just think about that for a second. Both of those lack humility. Ability is not as important in the Christian life as humility is. Now, let me take you to this next idea, and here it is. Faith is hard when you reason without taking into account the faithfulness of God. Okay. Now, in order to understand what's going on in Numbers, you got to jump to Deuteronomy. So go there with me for just a second. And here we find this great passage. Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 29 through 33. This is what we read. Now, Moses is recounting again the story that took place in Numbers. And this is what he said. Then I said to you, do not be in dread or afraid of them. That's those who are in the Canaanites that are up there in the land that is ours. For the Lord your God who goes before you will himself fight for you, just as he did for you in Egypt before your eyes. And in the wilderness where you have seen, I love this, how the Lord your God carried you as a man carries his son all the way that you went until you came to this place. Okay. Just think about that. Moses said to the children there, he said, listen, your parents have died in the wilderness. You're about to come into the promised land in Deuteronomy. That's how it starts. Here's what I told your parents. I told them God carried you all the way. And yet somehow you forgot that. Now, I got a dad here who can carry 2 sons, or at least he said he could. So come on up here for me, Paul, if you could. Bring your boys with you, okay? And we're going to go on a journey, all right? So we'll start over here. We'll start over here in Egypt, all right? You got 2 sons. I'm going to name you 10, Ty, and I'm going to name you 2, okay? You ready? Let your dad pick you up. Dad's going to carry you somehow, all right? Here we go. There goes 10, and here comes 2, okay? Now, Dad's going to carry the sons. Are you with me? You ready? Here we go. We're just going to kind of meander around, okay? We're going through the wilderness. Hold on, boys. Here we go, okay? So we're just kind of walking through the wilderness. We're going to part the Red Sea right about here. We're going to come down here, okay? Dad has carried the boys, and he still keeps carrying the boys, right? Okay? Let's go over here. And the boys are saying, why are we wandering all over the place, right? What is going on? What is going on? Okay, we got to come back. Let's see. Let's go back over here. Here we are. Okay. Yeah, here we go. And we're going to stop right here at Kadesh Barnea, okay? Kadesh Barnea, and we're going to put the boys down, okay? Okay, so let me ask. Dad carried you. Did everybody see Dad carry them? Answer. Did their feet ever touch the ground? Answer. So Caleb and Joshua, the 2 spies, you're number 2, right? Number 2, yeah. They said, listen, God carried us, we can take this land. And the 10 spies said, nope, we don't think God carried us. That's why when you read the Numbers account, you hear nothing of that story. They don't talk about God carrying them. The 10 spies only talk about what they can't accomplish. They only talk, God's completely out of their conversation, but he's not out of the 2 spies' conversation. Here's what I want you to see. The same Father carried the 10 spies and the 2 spies and all the Israelites through the Red Sea, through Egypt, all the way through that. Deuteronomy says, Moses says, God carried you like a father carries his son, but only 2 recognize it and 10 don't. And the entire crowd goes with the 10 that don't. Here's a great question for you. Has God carried you through difficult times? Answer. So why would we not believe that he will continue to carry us through the additional difficult times unless we, like number 10, forgot what God has done? You see it? God did the work. God carried them. Now you guys I think you got to get back to the nursery because you're doing some duty, so Dad's got to carry you back there. Okay, here you go. You're out of here, all right? I just want you to see, again, this idea that God carried them. The 10 didn't get it, but the 2 did. And that's why the 2 believed that God would continue to carry them. And that's what else we read in Deuteronomy 1. Yet in spite of this word, you did not believe the Lord your God, who went before you in the way to seek you out a place to pitch your tents, in fire by night and the cloud by day, to show you by what way you should go. Just fathom this. There is still the pillar of the cloud and the pillar of fire over the tabernacle when they sit there at Kadesh Barnea. And 10 spies say, we can't do it. We can't take it. And 2 say, of course we can take it. Look who's with us. And it's like nobody sees that God has led them that far. It's this great reminder. Faith is hard when you reason without taking into account the faithfulness of God. Faith is always going to be hard. The best thing we can do is just pause and remember the faithfulness of God. In fact, I love that text where it said, you recollected. I thought about that word a little bit this week. Recollection means to recollect the times of God's faithfulness in your past, those times that doubt has scattered. It's a great way to think about recollection. I think many of us need to just do more recollection. Right? Before we take a step of faith, we just need to recollect all of the thoughts, all of the ways that God has been faithful to us in the past. In recollecting those things, we can then say, I believe that God will be faithful to me in the future. So I step forward in whatever he is taking me through by faith. Doubt scatters those moments of God's faithfulness. Doubt causes us to forget how God was faithful. Instead, we need to do a period of recollection. So here's how we're going to do that. These are what I'm going to call faith strengtheners right out of the text, okay? Focus on the truth. Don't keep looking for excuses. Take your Bibles and jump to me to Deuteronomy 1. Now remember, Deuteronomy 1 recounts this story with a little bit more detail because it's being told 40 years later to the children who are about to come into the promised land. And Moses retells them, guess why? Because their parents hadn't told them of the faithfulness of God. Their parents died in the wilderness because they doubted at Kadesh Barnea and didn't take the promised land. And so God says, I'll send your sons and daughters into that land. And here we find it in Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 20. Now, back in Numbers, it said, God said, let's send the spies. But in Deuteronomy 1, we get the reason for what they said. Verse 20, and I said to you, let me back up, verse 19. Then we set out from Horeb and went through all that great and terrifying wilderness that you saw on the way to the hill country of the Amorites, as the Lord commanded us, and we came to Kadesh Barnea. And I said to you, you have come to the hill country of the Amorites, which the Lord our God is giving us. See, the Lord, your God, has set the land before you. Go up, take possession, as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has told you. Do not fear or be dismayed. Great news. Then all of you came near to me and said, hey, we got an idea. That's what I'm putting in there. That's not in my Bible. It's not in yours either, okay? We got an idea. Let us send men before us, that they may explore the land for us, and bring us word again of the way by which we must go up, and the cities into which we shall come. And Moses said, and the thing seemed good to me. And I took 12 men from you, and 1 man from each tribe, and they turned and went up into the hill country, and came to the valley of Escol, and spied it out. And they took in their hands some of the fruit of the land, and brought it down to us, and brought us word again, and said, it is a good land that the Lord God is giving us. But you would not go up. You see it? What we ought to do is focus on the truth, not look for excuses. In fact, I came upon this great statement. Truth remembers God's faithfulness in your past and his promises for your future. Okay? Truth remembers God's faithfulness for your past. He brought us all the way through that wilderness. Now we stand at Kadesh Barnea. Those guys are really, really big. I'm a little concerned that we'll be able to manage it or handle it when we get up there. But here's what we discover, that God says, listen, you can go because I've given you the land. But the people said, no, we're not going to go. They forgot God's faithfulness, and they also forgot his promises. Twice in that passage of Deuteronomy 1, we read this idea. The Lord gave you the land. The Lord is giving you the land. That's a promise God made through Abraham some 500 years earlier. God made the promise. I note this as well. The scheme of sending the spies was the fruit of unbelief, McIntosh says. His word, that is God's word, is enough for our hearts. We seek no mortal testimony to confirm the word of the living God. Just let that thought settle in for a second. Here's how it works. If God has told you something through his word, why in the world, in our insecurity, do we keep asking and asking, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? God himself, if he's communicated to you something through his word, is saying, listen, I've communicated. You don't need to seek a mortal testimony when you have the word of the living God. The Israelites didn't see it that way. Here's the first idea. Hang to truth. Don't keep looking for excuses for not going. Here's the second one. Dwell upon the character of God. Don't be consumed with your inabilities and lack of strength. Dwell upon the character of God. Don't be consumed with your lack of abilities or inabilities or lack of strength. Go back with me to Numbers 14. Numbers 14. Numbers 14, verse 17. Numbers 14, verse 17. And now, please let the power of the Lord be great as you have promised. See, it's all about God's power. It's not about what they could do. Saying, the Lord is slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, forgiving iniquity and transgression. It's all about the power of God. It's all about the love of God. But it's not just about the power of God, it's also, and the love of God, it's also about the wisdom of God. And when you take those three elements and put them together, you can step forward by faith because it's no longer about your inabilities or your lack of strength. When you look at the Numbers account, you discover that the Israelites who followed the 10 spies, they stepped back and they said, we're not strong enough to do this. What's really fascinating is that God said, okay, you guys have said you're not going to go up into the promised land, even though I got you all the way up here to Kadesh Barnea. You've said you're not going to go up to the promised land. God says to them, listen, in the next couple days, those 10 spies are going to die because of a plague. And they die. The 10 spies who gave the wrong account died, and the 2 live. And all of the people say, wait, we missed it. We messed it up. Let's go up there. And Moses says, God's saying you can't go up there now. No, we can. We believe we can. We will. Right? And they go up into a battle and get destroyed and come back frightened to death because they tried to do something in their own strength, not in the strength of the Lord. One of the things we want to do is to dwell upon the character of God. So wherever you are today, wherever you're saying, and you say, Phil, if you knew my week, you'd know why it's really hard to trust God without reservation today. It's been a hard week. Faith is hard sometimes to do. Let me give you 3 characteristics of God. We've covered 2 of them already. Here's the third one, his wisdom. His love, his power, his wisdom. When you put those 3 together, I like to think they form like a triangle. You and I are in the middle of that triangle. We saw his steadfast love in Numbers 14. That's what God says. Listen, he was a God of steadfast love. We saw his power, that he was able to bring them into the land, and though they didn't believe him, he would bring them into the land 40 years later, having them cross the River Jordan, bringing down the walls of Jericho. God did all of that by his power. But let me show you his wisdom. I was sharing this with our 12th men's study this past Tuesday. It's one of my favorite passages in the Bible, and it's found actually in Exodus chapter 13. Exodus 13. Go there with me, Exodus chapter 13. For when they crossed the Red Sea, this is what we read. When Pharaoh let the people go, verse 17 of Exodus chapter 13, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines. That would have been up alongside the Mediterranean Sea. By the way, that's the shortest way, the shortest possible way to get from Egypt to Israel, to the land of Israel, would be the way of the Philistines, that path that goes up along the Mediterranean. God did not lead them that way, for God said, lest the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. Here's how the wisdom of God works. You and I see possibilities of what might happen or what might not happen, and we get frightened. But God sees possibilities, because in his wisdom he can do this, as if they're actualities. It's not if only or what if. God sees them as if they actually could have happened. Therefore, God knows what's best for you when he leads you through the Red Sea as opposed to the way of the Philistines. God says, listen, I know if you went that way, you would have been frightened and you'd returned. I know that as absolute fact because God's wisdom does that. He sees possibilities as if they're actualities. We don't see it that way, but God's wisdom does. So therefore, anything you are facing was granted to you through the love of God, the power of God, and the wisdom of God. God knows what's best for you. God desires what's best for you. That's his love. God has the power to do what's best for you. That's his power. He wants what's best, he knows what's best, and he can do what's best. And in that triangle of those 3 characteristics of God, we can have faith. By the way, you'll know when you're not practicing it, because you're going to kick out one of those sides of the triangle and you're just going to have an angle. You're going to kick out wisdom. You're going to say, I don't really know if this is what's best for me. Right? Or you're going to kick out power. I don't know if God can really do what's best for me. Or you're going to kick out love, and it sounds like this. If God really loved me, why would he let this happen to me? You see it? You just shoved out one side of the character of God. And when you do that, it's going to be really hard to exercise faith in your difficulty. Great reminder. His love, his power, his wisdom. One writer captured it this way. Doubt grows when you're occupied with yourself and your difficulties instead of God and his resources. Okay? Doubt's going to grow when you're occupied with yourself and your difficulties as opposed to God and his resources. You say, what are those resources? His love, his wisdom, his power. Rest there, trust